Welcome to the 8th episode of Casual Commander. Today we have Pine on Go-Shintai of Life's Origin, a deck compiled completely of enchantments using Umori as the companion. Next we have Bear on Kotori Pilot Prodigy, a deck filled with vehicles and artifacts to give lifelink and make use of Kotori's ability. And finally we have me on the pair of Yoshimaru Ever Faithful and Rograkh. The deck is filled with plenty of red-white legendary permanents to try and make Yoshimaru as big as possible to kill all the opponents with commander damage. I start us off by playing a land and casting Ragavan, Nimble Pilfer, and passing the turn to Pine. Pine plays a tap land for turn and passes the Bear. Bear plays a land for turn and casts Soul Ring before passing the turn to me. I go to combat, attack Bear with Ragavan, exiling a card and gaining a treasure. With said treasure, I cast my commander Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful. Follow up by playing a legendary land, putting a 1/1 counter on Yoshimaru, then cast Norin the Wary, putting another counter on Yoshimaru, and finally finish with casting Rograkh, triggering both Norin and Yoshimaru to put a 1/1 counter on it before passing the turn to Pine, having Norin return and putting an extra counter on Yoshimaru. So it's less annoying to watch. I'm only gonna mention Norin the Wary exiling himself when it is relevant. Pine plays a Prismatic Vista, which he uses immediately to fetch for a mountain, casting Darksteel Mutation on my Yoshimaru. He then passes a turn to Bear. Bear plays a land and casts Keeper of the Accord before passing the turn to me. On my turn, I attack Pine with Ragavan and Yoshimaru, making a treasure and exiling a card, before playing a land and casting Tenza, Goto's Maul. With that, I pass the turn to Pine. End of turn, Bear's Keeper of the Accord triggers, making a 1/1 token and searching his library for a basic plains. Pine plays a tap land for turn and passes the Bear. Bear plays a land for turn and casts Sky Sovereign, Council Flagship. When it enters the battlefield, he kills my Ragavan. He goes to combat and attacks me with Keeper of the Accord. After that, he passes the turn to me. I play a land for turn and cast Jeska, Thrice Reborn. It enters the battlefield with 2 loyalty counters, and I use its 0 ability targeting Yoshimaru. After that, I equip Tenza to Yoshimaru and attack Pine with my commander, killing him with commander damage. End of turn, Norin returns, and another counter is put onto Yoshimaru. Bear casts Scrap Trawler and follows it up with his commander, Kotori Pilot Prodigy. He then crews Sky Sovereign with his Scrap Trawler, and at the beginning of combat, Kotori gives Sky Sovereign Vigilance and Lifelink. He goes to combat and attacks me with his Sky Sovereign, using its trigger to kill my Jeska, gaining 9 life in the process. I go to combat and attack with Norin, making it so he exiles himself. End of turn, Norin returns, and another counter is put on Yoshimaru. Bear plays a land and casts Katsumasa, the Animator. He then crews Sky Sovereign with his commander, goes to combat, giving Sky Sovereign Vigilance and Lifelink, and declares an attack trying to kill my Rograkh. In response, I cast a Chroma's Will, selecting both modes because I control commander. After the will resolves, I block Sky Sovereign with Yoshimaru. After that, Bear passes a turn to me. On my turn, I cast Audric, Lunar Marshal, putting a counter on Yoshimaru. I go to combat and Audric triggers, giving all my creatures First Strike, Trample, and Menace. With that, I attack Bear with my commander, and he takes the damage. End of turn, Norin returns, and a counter is put on Yoshimaru. At the beginning of his upkeep, Bear puts a 1/1 counter on his Soul Ring. After that, he plays a land and casts Tezzeret the Seeker, -4ing him immediately to search up Imposter Mech as a copy of Audric. He then triggers Audric and Kotori so that all of his creatures gain Flying, Vigilance, and Lifelink, and attacks with all of his creatures. After that, he passes the turn to me. On my turn, I cast a Hope of Girapur, putting a counter on Yoshimaru, and follow it up with Ashling the Pilgrim, putting yet another counter on Yoshimaru. At the beginning of combat, both Audric trigger, my creatures gain Flying, Trample, First Strike, and Menace, and Bear's creatures gain Flying. Bear blocks with most of his creatures and goes to 20 commander damage, and the turn is then passed to him. End of turn, Norin returns and another counter is put on Yoshimaru. Bear looks at his options and cannot find a way to deal with Yoshimaru. He then proceeds to concede the match. So the winner this time is me on Yoshimaru.